We sit down with Todd Spencer, the president of the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. And as the association celebrates their 50th anniversary, we'll be highlighting not only the achievements of the past 50 years, but also taking a look ahead to the goals and priorities of the association as it moves forward for the next 50 years and beyond. And Todd, I think when we talk about OOIDA, obviously you start at the beginning. I think the story of OOIDA and its founding is really cool. How it started, from a small trailer in a parking lot to growing to where it is now. And as I, drive in the morning, I look at this building, and it's tough for me to imagine that's where it started. So when you think about where it started to where it is now, there's got to be an immense amount of pride that you see and you feel for this association.
There certainly is, and actually, for me, it's still a marvel because, it started from nothing, from scratch. I mean, a lot of drivers that were committed that recognized the need for change, and a handful that were willing to dedicate themselves to actually doing everything they could to try to make that a reality. And, and we're all fortunate that, some of that took root. And we're also fortunate that there were enough truckers out there on the road that recognized this as something worth investing in and put their support behind it. And obviously leadership at the start, and then engagement, involvement from the members, as in the role of activists, communicating where it needed to be and showing support when they needed to. That's what was the key to the success. And of course, the other reason that OOIDA was successful, and when others aren't, is that the interests of the membership, the interests of the folks behind the wheel, were always top of mind, and that's what came first. And by being persistent, and again, part of the job is certainly educating and making folks aware of what's needed, but it's also we have to be eternally pushing, encouraging, engaging folks that are new folks that are entering trucking every day. That if you want the system to treat you fairly, you got to be a participant. You got to be a player. You got to be involved. And OOIDA has always made it a priority to create an atmosphere where truckers can get behind and show their support. And if enough do it, we're persistent enough, you're going to make some progress.
Well, and you talk about, having those strength in numbers, fighting for the rights of all truckers. That's kind of, been the mantra of OOIDA, yet every trucker isn't a member of OOIDA, and you're still fighting for their rights as well. Clearly, we talk about the strength in numbers, but I think with as much going on in the industry right now, you could make a strong argument that it's more important now than ever to have somebody have a unified voice and to be able to fight for you and fight for your rights. Why do you think it's so important for more truckers to become members of the association?
Well, in the policy-making arena, in the legislative arena, size matters, engagement matters, and of course, while there aren't lots of truckers around with lots of disposable cash that they can throw into political campaigns and things like that, our strength comes from numbers of people that are engaged, and that know what's going on, and that will reach out and communicate the message that needs to be communicated, on a broad scale. So those in the legislative arena, the policymaking arena, they know folks are paying attention, and obviously the message you deliver has got to be it's got to be an honest one, it's got to be a sincere one, and it has to recognize the reality that we live with. But the concerns, the most important people in trucking are those behind the wheel, and they're key to any successful endeavor in trucking. If you want to see highway safety improved, you've got to involve the men and women behind the wheel, because they're on the front lines, and you got to listen to what they have to say. Because they're going to be the real experts, because they deal with these issues every day, and listen to them, take their concerns seriously, and act on them. And we may see some real meaningful gains. And in America, over the past decades, we've become more and more reliant on trucks and truck drivers basically to keep our country going. I mean, from everything that we consume, our building supplies, our materials of every kind, they're going to move on truck. And you have to have the best behind the wheel, and doing whatever we can do to encourage the best to stay behind the wheel is in the interest of highway safety, and it's in the interest of an efficient supply chain.
Sure. And, I definitely think obviously the pandemic was something that really put that into focus and put that on a highlight for people that may or may not have really ever noticed those types of things about the industry. But, going back to kind of what you talked about with having a unified voice, I heard you in a recent interview say when you were discussing truckers having that voice in D.C. and also at the state level, you'd said, quote, "Policymakers and lawmakers can't just hear from truckers when they've got a gripe. They need to be educated on a full-time basis." To me, and I don't know if you're a fan of the show Undercover Boss, but I find it fascinating when these people who don't typically, entrench themselves in an industry decide to go ahead and do the job for a little bit and take a look at what really happens on the ground and at that base level. And their minds are blown when they see this. I think that's one of the more important parts about OOIDA is that not only is this association founded by truckers and ran by truckers, and everyone who's in a position of power here has at one point been on the road. Like, it matters that the association knows what's going on with the day-to-day, but how is OOIDA working to achieve that goal of being able to make the trucker's voice heard, not just when there's a gripe, but saying, hey, here's also how our industry needs to be moving forward?
Again, pretty much from the start of OOIDA, the founders recognized that when you go to D.C. and you talk about issues, what you become immediately aware of is that there are all kinds of other groups, all kinds of other economic entities, people that have a perspective on the issue, and generally their perspective on the issue is going to be advantageous to them. Sure. And maybe not for you, maybe just totally disadvantageous to you, but from their perspective, if things are working just fine, don't change a thing. And of course, and this is true today, if the only people lawmakers and policymakers hear from are those that have a different perspective from those that operate the trucks, then lawmakers and policymakers are going to have a really, really skewed perspective on any issue. If you want the best example of that right now is that how many news stations over the past, I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, 5, you can go back 30 years and you'll find all kinds of news outlets reporting this terrible driver shortage that we've had.
I've heard about that, actually.
Yeah, for over 30 years. When news organizations are reporting that, when you hear lawmakers talk about this great big shortage of drivers that we have, and this is lawmakers in D.C., this is lawmakers in every state, you know who they're hearing from. Sure. They're not hearing from the people behind the wheel that are out there right now. We're looking at a situation where, based on rates and how the spot market's going, we've got too many trucks chasing available freight.
Sure.
So there's no shortage there.
When we talk about some of those changes that have gone on throughout the past 5 decades since OOIDA was founded, how have you seen the needs of the members of OOIDA kind of change with the times, and how is the association kind of adapting and evolving to meet those needs?
Well, trucking has grown. The correct word is complex, but it's certainly, there are many, many more dimensions of it than there used to be. Many different variations, and of course, we have to change with those. We also have to recognize opportunities. In some instances, some relationships, drivers are going to do better than others. And of course, we also, our society is changing and the environment that we all live in. And, there are going to be trends going forward that, things aren't going to stay the same. We have to evolve with them, and that includes the folks folks behind the wheel. we have to evolve with them, and we want to kind of create the environment, or try to create the environment where they can evolve and continue to provide the service that they do to the country, to the nation, to all the suppliers and all of us consumers.
Yeah, I think when we talk about evolving, it's almost an inevitability, right? It's not a question of when it'll happen, or if it'll happen. Sorry, it's a question of when it'll happen.
Oh, yeah.
And I think about a lot of the stuff that the association has going on right now: speed limiters and the Guaranteed Overtime for Truckers Act, and truck parking issues. I mean, there's a myriad of things, right? Overcharging for insurance and insurance rates. But with everything that's going on, what role do you see the association playing in the coming years, kind of solving or at least finding solutions for some of those problems?
Well, I think it's going to be the role will be the key role, because one of the similarities that exists today to what existed decades ago is that it's foolhardy to think someone else is going to accurately and adequately share your concerns in the policy-making arena. They don't. Their concerns are the priorities, and while in the beginning, certainly the founding members of OOIDA were certainly naive and innocent in terms of the way DC works. I could tell you that, while bigger interests had their interests taken care of back then, the number of interest groups that are now vying for focus and attention and favorable treatment and things like that in DC, that's grown exponentially. Virtually every entity is an interest group, and they're in at the table, and they want theirs, and they're not especially concerned about your interests. And that's one of the downsides of small business in every particular niche in our country. Small business is always going to have to work harder and always going to have to struggle. And what OOIDA offers is that, hey guys, come on, let's talk, let's sing out of the same hymn book. Let's work together, let's push in the same direction, and if we do, we will be much more likely to get the due consideration that we should. Because again, trucks aren't going to go away. We got to have them, and we've got to have good people behind the wheel.
I think it'd be really hard to imagine, at least the industry as it is now, where it would be without OOIDA and the influence that it's had on trucking. And I think obviously there's a lot of the big victories that get highlighted a lot, but what are some of maybe the smaller victories? I know you had mentioned one earlier, but what are some of the smaller victories you think that may go unnoticed that OOIDA played a real big factor in?
Well, let me throw out the one big one right now. I mean, we hear a lot in DC, and we hear a lot from regulators and policymakers about the steps that they're taking to make parking a bigger priority and to create more parking for truckers. Well, OOIDA was the folks that were raising this issue and have been for the last quarter century. And the reason for that is simply we talk to the people every day that have that concern. We've seen that concern with our own eyes. And we reckon, myself, every member of our board of directors is a trucker or former trucker. We've been in a situation where you can't find someplace to park when you desperately need to. So yeah, that's number one right now. But going back decades, once upon a time, every truck that ran in very many states it wouldn't be uncommon for them to have 6 license plates on the front bumper of the truck, and have as many as 30 decals on the side of on their door sides that showed they were registered with each state that they operated in. At one time, to run a single truck, you individually had to register with all of these different states, pay all of these different fees. States didn't recognize each other's license plates. Every state had their own fuel permitting system, which meant for each state that you went through, every quarter, you have to fill out that state's quarterly fuel report and submit it for everyone.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like a lot of unnecessary work.
To small business. And of course, it created the biggest frustration for the smallest operators. And of course, while it was pretty clear this was an impediment to commerce, it wasn't a big deal for the bigger carriers then because they had people to do it. It was no sweat off them. And they recognized then that, well, yeah, we might, if this went away, who would it benefit? It would benefit our competition. They weren't interested in doing that. So that was one of the big changes that OOIDA is responsible for, the quarterly fuel tax reporting, the things that we take for granted right now. We might even grumble about them, but to compare the way it used to be, where it is now, baby, this is Shangri-La. That's just kind of one example.
Sure.
And the takeaway from this is that, while that was decades ago and it's in the rearview mirror now, there are other things going forward that play out the same way. While we may all be truckers, the big guys in our industry know full well that the regulatory impact is hardest on their competitors, and and they don't like their competitors.
I think when we talk about a lot of the issues that go on in the industry, the thing that really stands out to me is a lot of these are decade-long issues, right? They've been fights that people have been going back and forth on for decades now, and the thing that I take away from that is that fight's not going anywhere. It's going to continue to happen going forward. What will it take for the association to, or I guess maybe what do they need to really grow their impact on the industry going forward and find a solution for some of these problems that people have been talking about for decades?
Well, one, you're never going to solve everything. But having said that, you're going to certainly be more likely to resolve more issues on a more timely manner. I mean, for us, obviously, if we have more members, we have more members that are participating in the system, that are engaged in the system, and in moving in the same direction. So we have a clearer voice that gets a clearer voice in the policymaking arenas, and certainly, obviously, you want to be right on issues, and of course we're fortunate enough to, as advocates for the littlest guys, the people that generally own the truck that they drive, they're generally going to be the best, safest drivers out there, and the career professionals that that take pride in every aspect of what they do, and and safety is their highest regard. So we're proud of the people that we support, the people that we represent, the people we advocate for, and because we also recognize that when all hell is breaking loose, these are the kind of folks that that we need to have behind the wheel, bringing us what we need, and that we see it. We saw it during the pandemic, but we regularly see it whenever disaster strikes around the country, whether it be floods or hurricanes or whatever.
Todd Spencer, the president of the Owner-Operators Independent Drivers Association, is our guest today. The association celebrating 50 years of fighting for the rights of all truckers. Todd, congratulations on 50 years and continued success.
Well, thank you very much. And it's a cause that I've always been proud to be associated with and always will be.